House Resolution 24, resolved that Donald John Trump, President of the United States, is impeached for high crimes and misdemeanors, and that the following article of impeachment be exhibited to the United States Senate.
These articles charge incitement. Once before, the House impeached a President of the United States within a week of the alleged offense. That was President Andrew Johnson, days after he removed Secretary of War Edwin Stanton in 1868. Over 50 years later, the Supreme Court declared unconstitutional the Tenure of Office Act that President Johnson had refused to obey. In other words, the House was not only hasty, it was wrong, punishing noncompliance with an unconstitutional law. At least when that occurred, the constitutionality of the law in question was unsettled. Here, however, an angry House majority races to impeachment in direct violation of settled constitutional law. Again, the articles before the House charge incitement to insurrection. They do not specify inciting language. The law is well settled. Quote, "What is required to forfeit constitutional protection is incitement speech that specifically advocates for listeners to take unlawful action." The violence last Wednesday was abhorrent. Perpetrators should be prosecuted. Those responsible for security decisions held accountable. Congress can disapprove, revile, condemn, even censure, but you cannot, consistent with the rule of law, punish that which the Constitution's First Amendment declares protected. If you do it, the violators of duty to this Constitution, however angry, will be those who vote for this article of impeachment. It is not Mr. Green's article of impeachment. It is incitement, and the Constitution is settled on that point.
I had tears to well in my eyes as I heard Mr. Hoyer, and I know that hearts are hurting. It's a very sad time in the history of our country. No one is celebrating. No one wants to see this occur. I was at the Rules Committee by way of Zoom. I was there for the entire hearing. Those members on the other side, this is something that they understand and they take seriously. Regardless as to what's said, I could sense that they're hurting too. So I just want to thank everyone for all that has happened and the appreciation that's been shown. And I want to say that the healing that we talk about, that has to begin. May I have just 30 seconds?
I yield the gentleman 30 seconds.
Gentleman has additional 30 seconds.
Thank you. The healing, it has to start with some of these people who were there initially, who helped to lay this foundation, 110 people. I want to recognize Maxine Waters, Congresswoman. A lot of them were threatened. Their lives were disrupted. And if I may, with unanimous consent, I'd just like to insert their names in the record.
Without objection.
I thank you, and may God bless our country as we go forward.
I rise with a very simple question. On January 6th, thousands broke the law by taking siege of our Capitol here with us inside. Has any one of those individuals who brought violence on this Capitol been brought here to answer whether they did that because of our president? It appears I will receive no answer. I will yield my time back to the gentleman from Ohio.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Ohio. Wishes to reserve his time.
Madam Speaker, there are more troops right now in Washington, D.C. than in Afghanistan. And they are here to defend us against the Commander-in-Chief, the President of the United States, and his mob. I would ask my colleagues to look at the faces of those young Americans defending democracy, defending us, and find an ounce of their courage to do the right thing, as several Republicans have, and take a tough vote for the future of democracy, for the future of our
The
country.
gentleman's time is.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. For 3 years, Democratic members of this body and the mainstream media lied to the American people that the Trump campaign colluded and conspired with Russia. For years, after an exhaustive investigation, it was found that there was no evidence that the Trump campaign colluded with Russia. Should Democratic members of this body resign for lying to the American people repeatedly and sowing division and dissension all across America? And it was all a lie. You have brought one article of impeachment to the floor, and your one allegation alleges, and I quote, Donald John Trump engaged in high crimes and misdemeanors by inciting violence against the government of the United States. In D.C., it's a crime to, quote, intentionally or recklessly act in such a manner to cause another person to be in reasonable fear and to incite or provoke violence when there's a likelihood that such violence will ensue. There was no language in the president's speech that incited or provoked violence. In fact, at around the 18-minute mark, he stated, and quote, peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. You may think that he's inciting violence because he believes there was election fraud. That's his opinion, and he's entitled to that opinion, just like all of you were entitled to your false and fraudulent opinion that the Trump campaign colluded with Russia. The legal elements of incitement are based on the Supreme Court case Brandenburg v. Ohio, in which the Supreme Court set the standard for speech that could be prosecuted without violating the First Amendment. Brandenburg's speech called for violence against groups of Americans, and the court found that Brandenburg's comments were not directed to inciting or producing imminent lawless action. The court found that it was protected speech, and he was calling for violence. That's the current law of the land. The president didn't even mention violence last Wednesday, much less provoke or incite it. There was no crime committed, and therefore no basis for impeachment, as you need a high crime or misdemeanor for a basis. You have created a mockery out of the impeachment process, and I urge all my colleagues to stand against it and fight the latest fraud being perpetrated against the American people by the radical left.
The gentleman yields back.
Madam Speaker, St. Louis and I rise in support of the article of impeachment against Donald J. Trump. If we fail to remove a white supremacist president who incited a white supremacist insurrection, it's communities like Missouri's 1st District that suffer the most. The 117th Congress must understand that we have a mandate to legislate in defense of Black lives. The first step in that process is to root out white supremacy, starting with impeaching the white supremacist in chief. Thank you, and I yield back.
And from New York wishes to reserve. The gentleman from Ohio.
I urge my colleagues to vote against impeachment of our sitting president, Donald J. Trump. You can tell the American people that this is a vote to impeach upon the grounds of inciting violence and insurrection, but the American people see a double standard. They see a standard implied to those on the left who commit violence, and they see a standard to those applied to the right who commit violence. The American people see this, and they understand it. I've been here all of 1 week, and what I see, instead of lawmakers who are truth seekers, I see lawmakers who are power seekers. And that's never good, never good. What a shame, what a shame. The American people are watching to see how their elected officials respond at this moment in history. Will you vote to mend, or will you vote to further divide this country? I'm urging you to use this opportunity to be the leaders the American people are seeking for such a time as this. God help us as a nation, and I pray that God will keep his hand upon the greatest nation that the world has ever seen. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman from Ohio.
Madam Speaker, now we hear talk of the president's notion of a peaceful transfer of power, which apparently means what? Minimal casualties? Now we hear talk of healing after the criminal acts are completed. Never as a criminal defense attorney did I say, Judge, yeah, my guy completed the armed robbery, but let's heal now. No, there was accountability. There was accountability then, there should be accountability now, and there should be impeachment now.
The President of the United States deserves universal condemnation for what was clearly, in my opinion, impeachable conduct. pressuring the Vice President to violate his oath of the Constitution to count the electors. His open and public pressure, courageously rejected by the Vice President, purposely seeded the false belief among the President's supporters, including those assembled on January 6th, that there was a legal path with the President. It was foreseeable and reckless to sow such a false belief that could lead to violence and rioting by loyal supporters whipped into a frenzy. Unfortunately, my Democratic colleagues drafted articles that I believe are flawed and unsupportable, focusing on the legal terms of incitement and insurrection. Even noting impeachment does not require meeting a certain legal standard, that danger for open speech and debate in this body and for the Republic is high if the House approves the articles as written. The language will be used to target members of this body under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. It will be used to suggest that any statements we make are subject to review by our colleagues and to send us down the perilous path of cleansing political speech in the public square. We must end this. Let us condemn that which must be condemned and do so loudly. But let us do it the right way, with deliberation and without disastrous side effects. We must end tearing apart our nation by social media and sound bites. Let us stop. Let us debate. Let us sit down and lead this nation together.
I'm voting to impeach because, as Lincoln said, no grievance is a fit object of redress by mob law. But we must recognize that our hard work begins to address the real grievances and despair in left-behind communities. To be worthy of this capital that we hold sacred, to fix our broken windows and broken communities, let's finally commit to investing trillions in creating good jobs in healthcare, in education, and infrastructure for communities and places that are hurting.
On this vote, the ayes are 232, the nays are 197. The resolution is adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.